Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just checking. All right, thanks. Thanks everyone for being with us today. It's so great to have you here. I'm really pleased that you chose to, share part of your day with us to find out about, what's going on in the College of Science and Engineering. And today's subject is research. So back when I was interviewing for this position, 4+ years ago, even then I got an impression, or I learned how important research was to this college, right? In terms of both advancing knowledge forward and also giving opportunities to our students. That was really clear to me right from my first conversations with people here in CSE at CMU. And you might say research is embedded in the DNA of the college. To all you biologists on here, see how I slipped that one in. Um, you know, I came in with a mandate, I felt, or an expectation of really pushing research forward in the college. And so, a couple of the things that we did structurally was I rearranged the associate dean positions a bit to create an associate dean for research position that Chris Teisner now holds, and he's on the call today. He created a research council with representatives from the different departments and programs within the college to represent the interests of research in the college. And also, I worked pretty hard along with the team and the faculty to open up new channels of research funding as well, and to streamline things and to make things as easy as possible administratively for faculty to pursue research and get them the fantastic things that they're doing and give these opportunities to our students. So I am always continually amazed at the breadth and the depth of what our faculty do in terms of research. And I'm amazed really in kind of two ways. One is how they integrate so well our undergraduate students and our graduate students and postdoctoral researchers with what they're doing, and train the next generation of students to go on, to excellence, whether they're pursuing research or, some other avenue in their careers. They'll be prepared with this type of independent learning experience that they have, under the mentorship of our faculty. I'm also impressed with the way that the research impacts lives, and thus the title of this campus conversation today, right? Impacting the state, the nation, and the world, and you, in terms of the impact that it has. And we have a great cross section of faculty here today to talk about what they do. And to introduce them, I'm going to kick it over to our Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development, Chris Teisner.
Well, good afternoon. If you're in our time zone, if you're joining us from other time zones, I'll just say hello. I'm actually pleased to say that we have 9 departments in our college. If you don't know our college already, but today I'm pleased to say that we have 3 fantastic faculty members from 3 different three different departments that are ready and excited to talk to you about their research. And more importantly, I would say, and you'll see this shortly, those faculty members will share with you how they engaged our CMU students in their research in solving real life and real world problems. So I will introduce each faculty member just before they will get ready for their presentation. So I will start off with our first presenter out of 3, Professor Jason Keeler from the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. And he will talk to you about his research and how he engages his students here at CMU. Jason?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I'll be talking with you today about the research that my group does, focusing on one particular project, looking at the influence of Lake Michigan on thunderstorm development. So a very local and important thing for us to understand here. Before getting into the details of the project, I want to give just a brief overview of the ingredients that we look for when determining if thunderstorms are possible on a given day. And the first is the most intuitive, moisture. Of course, we're dealing with clouds and precipitation where more moisture is that required component there. And as meteorologists, we usually quantify this using something called the dew point temperature. And the dew point is the temperature that the air would have to cool down to in order for the air to become saturated or have 100% relative humidity. Typically, thunderstorm environments, especially in Michigan, are characterized by dew point temperatures in the 50s to 70s Fahrenheit. The next ingredient that we look for thunderstorm environments is something called instability. I'm sure many of you have heard your local TV meteorologist talking about it being a very unstable day, but you maybe didn't know what they meant by that. I'll start with a broader definition of instability that many of you may have dealt with this diagram on the left here before, where we've got this valley and hill with balls that are in either of those positions. On the left, we've got the position of that red ball being in the valley, where you can imagine if I was going to perturb the position of that, starting to roll it up either a hill on either side of that and release it, it's going to roll back down to that, to the bottom of the valley, and that's our stable condition. Whereas on the right there, we've got that ball at the top of the hill, and if I were to just nudge that either left or right there, it's going to accelerate away from that initial position. So that's our broader definition of instability. Now, bringing this back to meteorology, instability is a measure of how strong updrafts, that rising air in a thunderstorm, can get. And we look at that based on the temperature of what we call an air parcel, where an air parcel, as you can imagine, this is just being some undefined blob of air that could be moving around in the atmosphere. And if that parcel is started to lift up in the atmosphere, if its temperature becomes warmer than its surroundings, that parcel is going to become buoyant or start to accelerate upwards and potentially become that thunderstorm. So that's our second ingredient there. Now, finally, in the atmosphere, even in environments that are generally favorable for thunderstorms, there could be a little bit of stability at lower levels in the atmosphere that requires air parcels to get some initial lift or nudge upwards so that they are able to eventually become an updraft and form that thunderstorm. And that lift typically comes in the form of fronts. We've got this diagram on the left there showing a cold front, or it could be other more local fronts like we're dealing with here, the lake breeze front, or mountains and other things like that. And if you have this moisture, instability, and lift all together in the same location and time, we can get a thunderstorm to develop. And Lake Michigan is going to affect all three of these ingredients. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on how Lake Michigan will affect instability and lift. Moisture, I'll just say that I'm sure it's easy for us to imagine that air passing over a large body of water could be moistened by passing over that. In terms of instability, that might be less clear-cut here. And so what I've got on the left for a reference point here is data from Lake Michigan showing the Lake Michigan water surface temperatures over the last 30 years, where as you go up in this diagram, that's increasing water surface temperature, and left to right, we've got that cycle over the year of our cooler temperatures for the lake in the winter, and of course, warmer in the summer. And Lake Michigan can promote instability or stability based on its water temperature relative to the air that's passing over it. And so in this time of year, in our winter, Lake Michigan is going to be warmer than the air that's passing over that. And so instability is favored. Without getting into too much detail, this is how we get lake effect. So you either really love or maybe don't like this, depending on how much you like snow. I like all of it as a meteorologist. In the summertime, though, the lake is going to be cooler than the air that's passing over it in many conditions. And so the lake promotes stability. Now, I just told you that we want instability for thunderstorms. And so we want to understand the role of Lake Michigan in promoting stability and how air over Lake Michigan can destabilize or become unstable when air is displaced over land. And to think about this a little bit more, I'm showing you two different satellite images. And the region that I'm focused in with these satellite images is in that red box in that upper map on the left there. And first, I'm going to focus on what happens when we have offshore flow. So that satellite image on the left. This is when I've got wind coming from the east going towards Lake Michigan. And I'm representing that with this red arrow here. And I've shaded that red to represent that that is our warm air that has originated over land. Now, on days when that offshore flow is weak enough, that offshore flow can be overcome by what we call the lake breeze. And the lake breeze is a localized wind that can develop when you have cool air over the lake and warm air over land. And that cool air over the lake can spread out like a small scale cold front. And so I've color shaded that so that the western portions of that are more blue, so that cooler air, and then that gradual warming of the air towards that purple portion of the arrow that happens when the warm ground starts to modify that air mass that originated out over Lake Michigan. With this offshore flow, I'm sure some of you have noticed here that there's a very sharp boundary where those flow is coming together there. And that's what we call the lake breeze front. That's that really well-defined zone where there's a larger temperature gradient, and it also affects the clouds. The stable air by the lake is clear. The unstable air further inland has these little cumulus clouds that we see. If you're a Bob Ross fan, these are our happy little clouds that we have there. But you see on towards the bottom there, there's one that maybe isn't quite happy anymore. It's grown into this thunderstorm because of the instability, because of the moisture, and the lift that's provided by that lake breeze front. If we contrast that by what we see on the right there with large-scale onshore flow, so large-scale flow from the west, we don't really see a well-defined lake breeze front. It might be a little bit harder to detect there, but you do see this gradual growth of clouds, increase in the number of clouds as you go further inland. And so you still have this destabilization. You still could have thunderstorms that develop, but it's less clear. And so this uncertainty that's there in terms of the role of the lake breeze front, how well defined or how poorly defined it is, sounds like a good thing for us to investigate more with a larger concentration of data. And so we need these observations. And so what I did this last summer is I led a project, NSF-funded project called the Maritime to Inland Transitions Towards Environments for Convection Initiation, or MIT-NCI field campaign. Now, that maritime to inland transitions is dealing with the air that's destabilizing or warming as it moves inland. And that convection initiation term there is just a technical term that meteorologists use for development of thunderstorms. And in this image here, you can actually see this is a photo I took looking towards Lake Michigan, and that line of small cumulus clouds is actually the lake breeze front. Now, this team, we went out for July of 2024. We had 21 dates that we operated, and our instruments were set up in between Holland and Lansing, Michigan. We had 37 team members, and quite a few of those were students, including 9 of those students being from CMU. We had 5 universities involved, but I was the lead along with CMU. And to achieve this research, we received $2.5 million in support from NSF across all 5 universities. So going to introduce you to all of the different types of instrumentation that we had out there to achieve our goals, starting off with those 2 domes that you see there in the back of those trucks. Those are actually mobile radars. And by having these mobile radars, it allows us to have those trucks drive towards where the lake breeze front is, scan that, and be able to learn about the structure of the lake breeze front in 3 dimensions. And by using those 2 different radars and all of their data, we can actually recreate the full 3D wind field and really learn a lot from those data. We have 2 mobile mesonettes. The shinier, pretty one in the middle there is our CMU mobile mesonet. We also have, thank you to the Dean's office for supporting that. On the left there is our collaborators at the University of Nebraska, who I can say we're a little bit jealous of our mobile mesonet out in the field. Importantly, though, what we had there in terms of instrumentation, these allow us to drive across whatever feature it is that we're studying, in this case, the lake breeze front, and measure temperature, pressure, humidity, and wind. So really targeted observations we get there. Next up, we have a Doppler LiDAR. This was fixed at the airport in Holland, Michigan, and allowed us to get some idea of the structure and flow in the lower atmosphere. We had a UAS, or a drone, that was actually getting us pressure, temperature, humidity, and wind profiles out over Lake Michigan. So we had our baseline of what were the atmospheric conditions before air moved inland and started to destabilize. In terms of other profiles, we also had radiosondes, or weather balloons, from the University of Illinois to get us the temperature, pressure, humidity, and wind profile throughout a deeper layer of the atmosphere, in addition to a mobile sounding team from CMU, where we could drive across the front and launch several weather balloons crossing that front. And not pictured here, we had something called flux towers. These are specialized instruments that allow us to measure the heat transfer and moisture transfer between the ground and the atmosphere. So very important in understanding destabilization. And we had those set up from the shore all the way into Lansing. So quite a bit of instruments there, quite a large team to make this happen. Focusing in on our CMU teams. So this is a more clear shot of our mobile mesonet here. And in the driver's seat there, you see during the campaign, that's one of our recent alumni who built on the experience that he had from MIT and CI, and he's now working on his master's at the University of Nebraska. Within that, so you see the driver is driving and nothing else. Safety is very important in our operations, and so the driver focuses on that, but everyone else in that vehicle has their own monitor where they can check on the data as it's coming in and help us make decisions in real time. For our second radiosonde, or weather balloon team here, it's harder to see because our balloon is smaller. So I've circled that for you there. And these are really more lightweight instruments. So I'm going to block my face for a second here so you can see just how small these are. These are just little styrofoam cups that have all of the sensors and everything else that we need inside there. So much more lightweight, designed to get those measurements over the lower atmosphere. Just showing a couple scenes from the field here. On the right there, you've got a day when some thunderstorms had developed, and we had just finished operations, and the students wanted that photo with the mobile mesonet and the storms in the background. And then on the left is another really nice example of clouds that have developed along the lake breeze front, where on the left is the cool, stable air closer to the lake. And as you get to the right, you start to get into that unstable air. So students are getting this experience in the field, seeing these things that they've studied in the classroom, and helping us to gather the data that's going to help us to learn more about how Lake Michigan affects storms. So in terms of how this impacts you, in the coming years, analysis of the data is going to allow us to improve thunderstorm forecasts. Broadly in Michigan, if you think of all the agriculture, especially the fruit crops that we have in West Michigan, this knowledge is going to benefit them in terms of having those better forecasts. And in terms of tourism that's in that area, people want to know if there's going to be a storm when they're on the beach. It's training our next generation of scientists as well here within Michigan. More broadly speaking, the large amount of data that we have here is something that scientists, beyond this campaign, are going to be able to use to improve how models represent thunderstorm development. And so this is something that will be able to be applied globally in terms of improving these weather forecast models. Lastly, I want to point out that MIT and CI was a one-year campaign. We're going to be busy over the next few years analyzing the data and publishing papers based on this, but the student experiences of getting out into the field is something that we have a separate fund set up to help students, have the support to be able to learn with this hands-on experience. We have the CMU STORM program, student training for observational research and meteorology. And if you're excited by seeing what we're doing for students and training them in the field and want to, help us out to do this more regularly, any level of support will be greatly appreciated. At this point, I'm happy to take any questions you have or have a broader discussion at the end of all of the talks.
Well, thank you, Jason. I'll just second what Jason mentioned. We will have some time at the end of the third presentation for general discussion, but if there are any immediate questions that might be more natural to ask now, please post these in the chat, or I'll confirm if Allison will let me know if someone can unmute themselves as well. I think that should be an option. While we're waiting to see if there are any questions, I'll just add to Jason's point on forecasting and tourism. I'll just remind you, Jason, that type of work improves our quality of life in Michigan, because I'm not a tourist here, but I like to know how should I dress and how I can plan my own weekend, which I don't consider tourism. I just consider quality of life in Michigan.
Absolutely.
My opinion is one of the best states in this country.
Hey, if I could jump in for 1 second, I wanted to introduce a special guest that we have on board. Our provost, Paula Lancaster, is here. For those of you who aren't that familiar with university structure, the provost is in charge of basically the entire academic operation for the university, and that includes the research piece as well, working with the vice president for research and innovation. And more importantly, she's my direct supervisor, and she's awesome. So Paula, thank you for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. My absolute pleasure. Glad to be here.
I see we only have one comment. I guess, Jason, in the chat room, it says, I live in Florida, so I can see where research like this would be very helpful and important and critical, I suppose. And that's me adding the few words.
And one of the earliest thunderstorm focused field campaigns happened in Eastern Florida back in the 1940s. It was a 1949 thunderstorm project, and other campaigns that have happened over the years down in Florida. Absolutely something that you deal with every day, certainly in the summer in that area.
Well, thank you, Jason. Seeing no additional questions and hearing no additional questions, I will take the pleasure then introducing our second speaker, Professor Anja Mueller from Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. So we are switching gears a little bit, but she's still part of our college, and she will share with us how she engages students in her research in materials chemistry science. Anja?
Thank you very much, Chris. So what I have actually, as soon as the slide comes back, the reason why I'm in materials chemistry, because you have the option, and that's what I love about it, to basically solve a problem from the molecular scale. And so what I'm talking about with is, a lot of problems come from a material that doesn't work for what you actually need it to do. And as a materials chemist, I can design materials on the molecular scale. And since I'm a chemist, I can make them too. I can synthesize them and test them. And then I usually work with other people to implement them, because, engineers are usually a whole lot better in that, or you're talking about drug delivery. Now, I should ask if everybody else is seeing my slides. There we go. Okay. So thank you for that, Allison. So what I have at the beginning.
Can you see, I'm sorry, are you seeing presentation mode, or are you just seeing the PowerPoint?
I'm seeing just the PowerPoint right now.
Okay, let's try to see if we can switch this.
That seems to be the same problem I had somehow. I apologize for that. So that, at least for me, looks better. I have I have two projects that I will present today that is about materials chemistry that can actually solve some problems. But when I say I have these projects, what I mean is what I have on this first slide right here. It's I am teaching the students and they are doing the work and actually at the end solving the problem with their work. So at the top left, I don't know if you're going to see, do you see actually my arrow on if I do it slide? Probably not. Okay, then I'm not pointing any, yeah. Yeah, so at the left, I have a student actually in the lab. So that's how it looks like when we actually make the material for the first project that we're going to present, our water project. And I have quite a few students. They're all graduates and undergraduates, completely mixed. On the top right, you have 4 graduate students in there right now and a couple of undergrads. All of them are going to do their own project. All of them will get a thesis out of it because all of our majors have to work on a research thesis and write on a research and write their thesis. Now, and hopefully they graduate with that. I have 2 more photos here to point out 2 more things. Since we train them how to do research and science, generally speaking, we also want to show all of our students how those science conferences look like. So for the undergrads, I make sure that they present at minimum at a local or regional conference. The picture at this point was when I went to a graduate student to a national conference about water membranes. And so that is something that we're trying to do for all of our research students. On the left is another project, so another group of students that I'm working with regularly, and that's high school students. The American Chemical Society has a program that allows students from financially disadvantaged is a nice way of saying it. Students that are first year students as well, first generation students, to work in research labs over the summer before, in the hope that these mentors, like me in this case, or Dr. Marquez on the left, on the bottom of that photo, that is working with me, that we actually mentor them so that they end up in college and are going to be successful in college after. And if you look at the students, the second from the left in the back row, Derek actually just got a stipend, a full ride to the University of Michigan. I mean, full ride with pretty much everything paid. Next to him, he has several options to go to different engineering programs. He hasn't quite decided yet. And the third one in that row in the back there, so next to her, so she is actually going to start at CMU. Hasn't quite decided yet if she's going to do biochemistry or environmental chemistry. So I'm proud of all of those. They have done excellent work as a high school student in the lab. So those are the people that actually do the work. Now, if I could have the next slide, Allison, I think you need to move it. So here are actually the 2 projects. The first project that I'm going to talk about. We can design a material for water treatment that takes out compounds that everybody has a hard time taking out. So that's what we're doing with our what we call the water project. So literally, if you look at drinking water facilities, they have their ways of taking out most of the compounds that are toxic or not good for you or taste bad or look bad. But even those big facilities of like the drinking water facilities in big cities, for example, there are some compounds that they even have a hard time taking out. Now, if you then talk about soldiers, this is funded by the Army right now. If you're talking about soldiers, they're going to have to do their water treatment in the field. They are not going to have a big, water treatment facility like a big city has. And so they still are supposed to have clean water to drink. Now, how do you do that? Well, there's some compounds that the Army hasn't been able to solve that problem just with what they have available in the field. And so that's where we are coming in. If you look at, and sorry for that phone in the back, if you look at how binding works on the molecular scale, you can design a normal material to make it really specific for that compound. And so that is what we are doing with the first two contaminants that the Army asked us to. And we are actually in our second round of this funding, where we're expanding to 5 other contaminants that they have a hard time with. So, and it's actually fairly simple in the design. We literally putting the contaminant into the reaction where we make the polymer, the material, and then we wash it out afterwards. Now, in the details, obviously, you always have the problems, and that's what we're working with at this point. Now, talking about how does that affect you or everybody else? The Army basically says, we want this made. So eventually we'll have a membrane that will be sold. And there the Army says specifically, this has to be basically made for everybody, because they don't want to have any problem with creating this. There will be then a big, they will buy a lot of those. There will be a big buyer, but it should be something that everybody can use and every treatment facility can use. And so that means that those membranes will then be available for treatment facilities that will provide all of you with water as well. That's the plan. And so that they are required that we work with a company pretty much immediately. And we have in our second go around of this funding right now, a funding for a proof of concept for a company that if we in these 2 years are actually going to complete the proof of concept and it works with the with the process of the company, they have agreed to basically make those membranes for us and produce them. And that is something that the Army is really, that is really important for the Army. And that will be part for every single project that they fund. So that is on my first project. So the second project is hydrogen fuel cells. That's a little bit harder to explain, so please bear with me here. Basically, if you look at transportation, obviously right now everybody uses gas. Some of them have now electric motors. But what the Army is looking for is an all of the above approach, that they can use different fuels in the field as well, because it might be much easier for them to have one fuel versus another in different places. So one of them they're going after is hydrogen as the fuel. And so with hydrogen, how do you get a motor run with hydrogen? That's what you use a hydrogen fuel cell for. Now, hydrogen, for the few chemists that might be in the audience, basically it should be understandable. For the others, please bear with me. Hydrogen can be split if you run it next to a catalyst into electrons and protons. The electrons are going to be your electricity that is going to run things. The protons is the leftover of that atom. And in this case, it has to cross the red membrane in the middle. And then there's another, it's going to react with oxygen in the air. And that's one of the reasons why hydrogen fuel cells are very advantageous as well, is the product out of that is water. There is no CO2 when you use hydrogen as the fuel. So that's great. But now we have to look at this membrane in the middle, the red one. Currently, all of these fuel cells use a membrane that require water for the protons to get across to the other side. But water boils at 100, and you kind of really only can use it at 80 because you don't want to get pressure of the first molecules to actually create gas. So that means you're limited to 80 degree as an operating temperature for a fuel cell. The other thing is, if you it really only works if you use acid in the process as well. And acid is corrosive, so these membranes just simply don't last that long. So to solve that problem with materials chemistry, I need to find a way of moving those protons across that red membrane, not using water and not using acid. And that is possible. There are ways around it if you use the right chemistry for it. And at that point, you should be able to run them at 150 or 180 degree, which has quite a few advantages. One of them is you can use as a fuel a hydrogen that isn't so absolutely pure that it costs a fortune to use. Obviously, at that point, the membranes last longer if they're temperature stable, of course. And you also going to make the process of generating the electrons and splitting those hydrogens more effective. With that, you're going to get more electricity out, and the whole thing overall is going to be better. So what I haven't said, though, yet is that to have a material that works for a long time at 150 to 180 degree and just transports protons and nothing else is obviously not easy, but it is doable, and that's what we're working on. So this project is in its first round of funding right now, also from the Army. We are starting to find a company that we want to work with as well. I'm going to be on sabbatical next semester. I'll visit actually the GVSC lab that we're working with right now to look at how they want to have the implementation of our membranes, so I can work directly with that. And then we'll have an easier time with accompany that one as well. Again, so we can solve problems that are general problems with chemistry, with materials chemistry, and it is the students that are doing it, just to remind you. So we are training the students to do this in the future as well in our process. And thank you. That is basically just a quick introduction of what materials chemistry can do for you.
Well, thank you, Anja. Again, for our audience, I will say if you have a question, if you can post it in the chat room, or if you would like to unmute yourself, you do have that option. While I'm waiting to see if there are any questions or if someone unmutes themselves, I will say our common connection between the three speakers that at least I see is water. So Professor Keeler was talking about atmospheric phenomena that generate clouds, eventually water. Professor Mueller was explaining how that is important and critical, not just to the Army and soldiers, but obviously anybody else in Michigan across the nation and that needs clean, safe drinking water. And if there are no questions, we'll move to our third speakers who will talk about water in our Michigan rivers. So it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Daelyn Woolnough from Department of Biology, and she will talk about our Great Lakes watersheds and especially rivers and how she assesses the health of those rivers and water that's in those rivers. Daelyn?
Thank you, Chris. And Yeah, I'm really excited to tell about my lab's research and how we're an expert here at CMU in this really specialized field, but we find it really exciting. And so I'm a research professor in the biology department as well as the Institute for Great Lakes Research. And this is me in the water in the Detroit River. People actually do go into it, mostly when they're doing research, I suspect. But we're really excited when we get to these opportunities. In this picture, you can see that my lab and students are there's actually 2 boats in the back of this picture, as well as Department of Fish and Oceans Canada and their student workers in the foreground. So we work with a variety of different people and in a variety of different places. So what do I work on? My lab does a lot of surveys of native freshwater mussels across Great Lakes watersheds. And so this is what we look like for half the summer. Butts up, heads in the water. And these are the clams. These are the larger shelled organisms and not zebra mussels that we mostly talk about as invasive species. These are the ones that were here and are still here before then, especially in our rivers. When my students pop up out of the water, they have bags, they've put their mussels in, and there's a lot of biomass. They learn a lot of things about our rivers in Michigan. And we study watersheds around Michigan and across the United States. This is just 3 examples of studies that we've done in the last handful of years. On the far right is the Detroit River. We've done work on the Detroit and St. Clair rivers. We do surveys in a variety of different places indicated by these dots. So this is Detroit and Windsor, Canada. And on the top left is the Chippewa River. We've been working more recently with the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe of Michigan to look at contaminants, more zoomed in on the Mount Pleasant area, but this is a study that was done earlier than that kind of instigated that work. This work did work on the Chippewa River and the Pine River. And then in a 5-year period, we actually worked on the Kalamazoo River after the oil spill. And so we do work throughout the state, mostly in the summertime, and then we're processing a ton of data when we're not working in the actual rivers. So here, the Tobacco River on the top, the Crystal River, in the Sleeping Bear Dunes area. We've worked with the national parks a lot. This upcoming summer, we are going to be working at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. And then the Detroit River. In our deeper areas, our students have the opportunity not just to snorkel and swim, but to do scuba diving as well. Often my lab gets funded due to events that happen. Many of you might have heard about the Wixom and Sanford Lake dam failures. And we are still working out in that area, but we were called upon almost immediately to find out what had died there. And now we are continuing work there for what is still now living there. I mentioned the oil spill in the Kalamazoo River. There's a variety of events that happen in the Kalamazoo River that we have done work after and hopefully sometimes before, so that we have before and after data. And in the Grand River, we actually are really lucky here in the state of Michigan to have a diverse community and assemblage of native freshwater mussels. We actually have 43 different species of these mussel in Michigan. There's over 300 in the United States. These are just like different species of birds. The fact that we have lots of species really means that they can be really healthy communities. In the Grand River, we actually have a federally endangered, globally rare species that's pretty abundant. And so our students are like touching and finding this organism that is almost found nowhere else in the world in any abundance. We worked on a dam removal in the Grand River in the town of Lyons, which is just over like 300 people. I think they're like the most educated about freshwater mussels in all of Michigan because we were there. And this is what we find. This is what our native freshwater mussels look like. They're diverse. There's different sizes and different looks of them. And our students are learning how to identify them and receiving employment afterwards across the country for this sort of study. This is a snuff box. My student, Mandy Caldwell, who now works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, And at this particular site, we were just finding lots of them. So it was a pretty exciting day. When we look for them, this is what they look like on the top right and the bottom of the river. So you kind of have to have your eyes open. You need to know what you're looking for. And we calculate them and do lots of modeling about where to find them as well. We're lucky enough here at Central Michigan University to have labs that we can work in controlled settings. We have found out that they filter more chemicals than wastewater treatment plants and are better at filtering than in our invasive bivalves like our zebra mussels and quagga mussels. They're also very much influenced the reproduction by urban and agricultural chemicals. We have a portable trailer where we do this research. We also do it downstairs here in the biosciences building. And here's just a picture of one of the mussels filtering in the Grand River on the bottom left. We also have done research on how mussels respond to changing temperatures. And this might relate a little bit to what Jason was talking about. So we're going full circle here. If mussels respond to different changing temperatures, what we find is that they do, and they filter differently, which means they clean our water differently because they are tiny little wastewater treatment plants in the bottom of our rivers, cleaning your water for free. If they're not there, if they're doing things differently, then that's a bit of a concern for our ecosystems. The neat thing is that we publish this too. So we have lots of, out of my lab, we have lots of student-led publications. Sometimes when I'm talking to Dr. Teisner in the dean's office, they're like, how was your scuba diving this summer? And he, I think he thinks it's all like pretty and nice and stuff like that. But sometimes it's a little rotten out there in rivers and lakes. But we have a fun time and we get some really amazing data. We do have some fun days too. Sleeping Bear Dunes was amazing the last couple summers. And we do publications. And so we get that data out to folks worldwide, and they are reading it, citing it, and realizing that we are the experts here at CMU in this really unique field. We've worked with the Department of Natural Resources after the oil spill in Kalamazoo to set up one of the first mussel hatcheries in the first mussel hatchery actually in the state of Michigan. In Saline, we have outdoor facilities where we literally have some baskets that hold some of our mussels in the very specific development of hatchery facilities, just like hatcheries for fish, but for mussels. And so we are the lead in hatchery development for the Great Lakes region. Our outreach is kind of fun. We have a portable trailer that we've used for research and for outreach where we teach the public about these mussels. They can look at microscopes at how they're microscopic to begin with and then grow to adults. We talk about the pearl button industry as well as, the pearl industry as well as the button industry and what mussels you can find in your area. Well, we've done that. We've developed a sticker that we give people. Everybody loves a sticker. If you're interested in a sticker, send me an email. I'll get one for you, as well as some signage. So if you're on the Grand River, the Kalamazoo River, you'll probably see some signage about freshwater mussels that was developed here at Central Michigan University. And so with that, I just have to remind you that if you have healthy mussel communities and assemblages, you have healthy rivers. And when you have healthy rivers, you have healthy humans. And I hope that sort of convinces you that mussels are important in our rivers, our native freshwater mussels. We are on X and on Instagram if you want to follow us. I have put a variety of different places that funds research in my labs, from state to federal to NGOs and international, as well as the tribe. And that is my email if people are interested in getting a hold of me. And with that, I'll throw it back to Chris or whoever is kind of moderating.
Well, thank you, Daelyn. I think you did indeed close the full circle. Again, my underlying theme here is how important water and our ecosystems are. I will probably pass it to Allison, but I would just say we can take questions, comments, discussion, obviously for Daelyn or any of our other two speakers. So thank you Jason, Anja, and Daelyn. And I believe Allison can confirm. I believe there was one question for Jason that he answered, I believe, in the chat already, but there is another one, I believe, for Anja.
I had a question for Daelyn.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if you're working with Consumers Energy on the handful of dams that they need to address over the next 10 years.
It's interesting you asked that. In the Grand River, there's a Weber Dam, which is just upstream of the dam that I talked about being removed. And we have worked directly with them and the DNR. We actually used the Consumers Energy facilities to do some host fish testing. We had our trailer there on their property doing research. And I have been in on a few of the conversations that Consumers has had about dam removals. Dam removals are happening around the state, around the country. And we're sort of we're kind of actually being pulled almost too much to some of these meetings that it's such an understudied natural resource, the freshwater mussels, and they're almost always below these dams. So it's an interesting conversation that can be continued. If you're interested in more, I can chat with you about that, Karen. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yes, we did have a question for Dr. Mueller. MIPs are very specific for particular analytes, but real-world water has many contaminants. How is a single MIP better than an activated carbon or chromatographic material?
There's a lot of answers to that. So basically, it depends how you want to implement it. So if you use your graphitic carbon, you use your, activated carbon, there are some compounds that you will not take out in sufficient amounts to keep the water non-toxic in the long run. And so at this point, then the MIP stands for molecular imprinted polymer, which is what I have describing to you without using that word. It basically would then be an additional membrane or implementation so for that specific compound that treatment facility has a problem with. And you can implement that in various ways. You can do it as a resin, so as a vat of material to filter it through, or you can have, if you're in a bigger facility, you have already membranes, probably if you're purification anyway, you can basically add a membrane. There are several ways of dealing with if you have 2 or 3, compounds that you don't take out sufficiently by either, having different membranes, but you can also imprint with 2 or 3 contaminants at the same time. So depending on how similar or different those contaminants are. So basically, these membranes are additionally to most of the training. If you're talking about like the Army is right now with mobile treatment, it will likely be implemented as a variety, as a general membrane to take out most of it instead of your activated carbon, because activated carbon has a big footprint that you don't want to move around. So you would have, the biggest screen getting the big parts out, and you get smaller and smaller, and eventually you add a specific one for the contaminant that you're worried about. So ammonia, for example, only shows up in rural areas. So if you're in a rural area, you're using the ammonia one. And if you happen to be in Bangladesh or where there's arsenate, then you're going to add an arsenate one, etc.
Hey, Professor, this is Jim Michaels. I asked that question.
Sounds
So
good.
is this stuff intended to be done by an individual soldier at all? Or is this a question of taking like a trailer out to a base and then having
it is a trailer, right? It is a trailer,
Okay.
and it's usually not the base, it's when they're out in the field. It is going to be some sort of trailer, and actually I haven't seen it in person yet. That's one of the things that I'm going to do during my sabbatical when I visit them in the fall. But yes, it is a trailer, and as I said, they're using mostly membranes instead of resins because of the footprint of the trailer itself. So,
Yeah, my company used to do stuff like that at individual industrial plants. We would put trailers out there to try to help them clean their water up for their cooling towers and boilers.
yeah,
And yeah, it's a tricky concept to try to be able to pull that off.
yes, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, actually, originally I was thinking of using this for companies, but they haven't been very excited about it because then they have to admit that they're losing toxic chemicals, which not everybody wants to.
Yeah, we were looking at it mostly for bringing in water from the outside
Mm-hmm.
and then using it for asset protection inside of a plant.
Yeah.
I don't know what they did for the water they dumped out. That was outside the scope of my involvement.
Yeah, I was
Oh.
looking actually at metals first, toxic metals. You know, when you talk about some of the companies that use that a lot.
Yeah.
They can easily be used for that if they're interested.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm retired now, so I'm out of the loop. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to draw everybody's attention to the chat. There were a couple of questions asked, I just want to make sure everybody sees those. Is anyone looking at mussels in inland lakes? I'm sure zebra mussels affect the indigenous mussels such as much as contaminants. And you will see that Dr. Woolnough answered that below. I know I want to be mindful of our time. And to echo Lori, yes, very informative. Thank you so much to our presenters today, to our Dean and Associate Dean for being here, and as well as Dr. Lancaster as well. Thank you so much for taking the time for that. Dean Ford, did you have any parting thoughts before we all go on our separate ways to possible lunch hour?
Thanks, Allison. So
Yeah.
I'll just echo what you said. Thanks so much to the audience for being here. Thanks so much to the faculty for spending their time with us and sharing what they're doing. You know, I hope, you know, if you are excited and fired up, you know, about what you heard today from our faculty experts, and this gets your interest up around research in, you know, the College of Science and Engineering, we'd be happy to talk to you anytime about that, about getting involved, you know, about supporting, and you know, and just about keeping in touch with the research enterprise here at CSE. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you. And everyone have a great day. Look for my email with the Zoom recording and other information, and fire up chips. Take care.